Alrighty, good morning, everyone. I just wanted to take a few minutes. Hopefully, you guys are enjoying your snow day or more or less freezing rain ice day. Um, I'm hoping you guys can take about 10, 15 minutes, however long this ends up being, hopefully, not longer than that, to review this. So, I've been reading just a lot about this presidential election. Maybe I'm more involved in it than some other people, but I think it's really important and critical, particularly for the nature of our class, so we have an understanding of how the presidential election works. And I was thinking about the things that we went over in class and the thing that the textbooks go over and things of that nature, and I feel as if we did not cover enough about the election process for the president during our campaigns and election chapter in which that was in. And I didn't really feel like the chapter on the presidency covered that, mainly because it focused on the powers of the president and the role of the president. So last night I was watching the town hall with Sanders and Clinton, and I was on my AP chat group, and I was just asking some clarifying questions from them. We were kind of sharing information, and this is what I found and put together. So I think this will be really helpful for you to figure out exactly how the heck we choose the president when it comes to the nomination process. It's easy once we have like the November process, but I think with just media involvement, it's become so much more open to what goes on in the RNC and the DNC. So I'm hoping this will give you some clarity on this matter. So here we go. First and foremost, we know that candidates choose to announce roughly 1 year prior. This is sort of something that I think some of our European friends joke around. There are rules in some European countries that you can't start campaigning until about 3 to 6 months before an election. So we have a whole year, and as we know, you guys are in a very exciting time. Republican field was massive. Democratic field was had originally 5 people started in comparison, and now we're down to 2 and down to 5 on the side of the Republican Party. So that's step number 1. Step number 2, just to review, we have the primaries and the caucuses, which are going on right now, usually between February and April. States hold primaries and caucuses, depends on the state as far as which one they want to choose to do. Caucus equals more celebratory in nature, right? It's that old school kind of casting of votes. You gather in a room. There might be some yays and nays. As we saw in Iowa, there was that issue of the coin toss in the Democratic Party for Clinton and Sanders. And each party has different rules in different states, which is what makes this process, I guess, more or less frustrating from a voting standpoint, is every state has different rules and regulations. So how is that controlled? A primary equals open or closed. Right, mostly closed primaries. Very few have open primaries. Typical ballot voting, like we go into cast for our local elections, state elections, and national elections. Each state and party, again, holds things differently. So Maine has a caucus, which will be coming up, I think, March 9th. So the rule for us in the state of Maine is registered voters, whether you're a registered Democrat or Republican, you need to find out where your caucus is held. So just for a civic plug, I encourage you guys, if you don't know and your parents are registered voters or your older siblings or you yourself are going to be eligible in time, click on one of those websites. I'm going to post the link to the slideshow afterwards. And go there, find out where it is. It's usually county-wide, so each county will have a place to meet, which is a whole conundrum for voter turnout, as we know. Step 3, the candidates have to win the delegates at the caucus and primary. So this was the thing that I was hung up on. We know that they have to do this, and for me, I just felt like we didn't get the why when we went over this in the campaign and election process. It kind of just was, well, because that's the way it is, because there are delegates. Well, why are there delegates? How do they work? Why are they so different? Why do some of them have so much power? So each candidate has to win the delegates within each state. So delegates are selected members of each of the party. So citizens choose essentially which people will delegate their vote best in selecting the delegates. So when we go to the main caucus, we go cast our votes, and then we, pledge to as far as, well, so-and-so agrees with me, let's vote for this person. He has a really good grip on, Marco Rubio or Bernie Sanders, and we want them to be the delegates when they go on to the convention. Those 3 levels of delegates The district level and congressional districts, this is what we do sort of at the county level. So we'll choose a few delegates there. Then we have the state level delegates. Those are mainly our state representatives, right? Susan Collins, Shirley Pingree, Angus King. And then pledged party leaders are elected officials. So governors as well can act as delegates. Other, different types of party members like Speaker of the House, whips, other members that work in the Capitol building as well. So basically, verbatim delegates are politicians, right, for the most part. Then we get to this whole superdelegate thing. And what I know a couple of you had asked, like, clarification on superdelegates, and I gave sort of like the textbooky answer. And part of it was because that's, I guess I didn't have a strong enough of an understanding on it, so I want to clarify this now. Superdelegates are really more well-known in the Democratic Party. Republicans do not have superdelegates. They have things called unpledged delegates. The unpledged delegates in the Republican Party only hold 10% of the total delegate count, whereas in the DNC, they hold a larger margin, I want to say around 30 to 40%. So superdelegates are really more known in the Democratic Party. Essentially, just kind of quote an article I was reading, superdelegate is a delegate to the DNC that is seated automatically and chooses who they want to vote for. DNC superdelegates include distinguished party leaders and elected officials. So I want you to think like Nancy Pelosi, different types of major people in the House and the Senate. Harry Reid, there we go. I was trying to think of the Senate Minority Leader, including all Democratic members of the House and Senate and sitting Democratic governors. So definitely people in our Congress and our governors are the makeup of that superdelegate population. I think this is really awesome as far as giving us a quick scan of this superdelegate presentation. So I'm going to play it. I'm going to see if it records. If it doesn't record the sound, I think it should though. You can come back and watch it on your own because again, I'm going to post a link to this slideshow. This too, if you want to check this out, gives a good explanation of the superdelegate situation right now for the Democratic Party.
On Super Tuesday, the voters put John McCain on the fast track to the GOP nomination. But the battle between Democrats Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama could last for months, with the nomination decided not by voters, but by superdelegates. It's very
and this is from 2008, but it's still relevant.
We call the fast draw to explain who these superdelegates are and exactly what they do. Josh Landis and Mitch Butler have just joined CBS News, and welcome, guys.
Thanks, Katie. So what a lot of people don't realize is that when a race is really close, our democratic system does something a little bit undemocratic. It takes power away from the voters.
Remember back in 2000, the presidential race was decided by the Supreme Court. And for the Democrats this year, another group of appointed officials will be calling the shots.
Pay no attention to the superdelegates behind the curtain.
Like the great and powerful Oz, these superdelegates are pulling the levers of power in your political party.
Which means your vote may not be what you think it is. Even if you and your party members across the nation choose one candidate, it does not guarantee that that person will become the nominee.
Here's why. When you cast a primary vote for your candidate, what you're really doing is telling a group of party officials, and these are the delegates, which candidate you want them to pick at the national convention.
But not all of them have to listen to you. Among those delegates, there's an elite corps called the superdelegates. These people are like political wizards. They have the power to support any candidate they want, even change their minds at the last minute, and they answer to no one.
In each political party, about 20% are superdelegates, enough that even if voters clearly pick one candidate, the wizards could still have enough power to tip the scales the other way. And you know a lot of these people.
Jimmy Carter,
Bill Clinton,
Al Gore,
House Speaker Nancy Pelosi,
Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid.
The Republicans call their wizards unpledged delegates, and they're usually not big names, but they're just as powerful. This superdelegate system may sound a bit anti-democratic, but the idea here is to give established party leaders more control, so that primary voters don't get carried away with someone who looks good, but could never win a general election.
These wizards are senators, representatives, governors, former presidents. They know the system very well, but do they know better than you do?
Let's hope so, because that's the way it works. And one of these days, the next leader of the free world could be in the hands of these superdelegates who don't answer to you or any other primary voter.
Pay no attention to the superdelegates behind the curtain.
Now I get it. So how do you become a superdelegate? It sounds like a great job and certainly all-powerful, right?
Yeah, well, it can be. You get to be a superdelegate or an unpledged delegate if you are a major elected official, from a big city mayor to a former president. They also include members of the National Committee, and some are just specially appointed.
All right. Well, that was great, you guys. Thank you so much. Josh Landis and Mitch Butler. I enjoyed that. Thanks.
So, to be continued. So I just think that gave a really good explanation of the whole superdelegate process, more or less, as far as who they are, how they work, how that gets configured into the system when it comes to choosing who's going to be the nominee for president. So again, feel free to watch that again. I also encourage you to click on this link above at the end of everything. It kind of gives us an overview of where Clinton and Sanders stands, which makes a lot of the Sanders supporters really angry. So I encourage you to check that out. Next, we have, so far, the delegate count, as far as you can see. So on the side of the Democratic Party, okay, and if you just look at, delegate count into Google, you'll get these cool charts, which thank you, Google, for that. Delegates won. Hillary Clinton has 503 so far, and she has... most of that is the superdelegate pledge, as you guys can see. So the Democrats definitely have a lot of power in the superdelegates. So I disagree with the gentleman in the video that said that the Republican superdelegates are just as powerful, because they're not. They're unpledged delegates, and they're only 10%. So the 10% isn't necessarily going to make or break. It's really if there's something that's close. So she has 503 already. Bernie Sanders has 70. She has won more states, but... here again, Sanders has been surprising us. It's been very close. And the Democratic National Convention requires 2,383 delegates votes needed for the nomination. Whereas on the Republican side, only 1,237 are needed for nomination. There's still a little over 2,000 up for grabs. Trump right now has 79. The unpledged delegates vote has not been counted in there yet. Cruz has one more than Rubio, so they're pretty much neck and neck still. The next Super Tuesday is going to be incredibly important for the Republican Party, particularly speaking, in figuring out who could get second place right now, or if there's a possibility of beating out Donald Trump. Lastly, we have this National Convention. So this is sort of the part two where I was a little bit more confused. I was like, okay, so we know the National Convention isn't, there's been a couple times in our history where that is where they actually chose the president, and then we introduced this primary and caucus system, kind of like the late 1800s, and that's sort of how we do, but we still have a convention. So do they just party? Do they just celebrate? What do they do? Well, they're usually held in the middle of summer. This year's are on July, I want to say the last 2 weeks of July, or mid-July, and they're opposite weeks, and they last 4 days. The RNC and the DNC both have different rules and regulations for things. Each of them has a rules committee, and I think some other name for a committee, but basically it chooses if eligibility committee. They can review the eligibility of the delegates, and the rules committee reviews the rules of the convention, and they can change from year to year. Normally, they're pretty consistent, but there have been times where the Rules Committee at each Republican or Democrat convention has changed things, and it's kind of, surprised the voters. They have to fall within the regulations of that McGovern-Fraser Act, but they can change things. So the most recent time we've seen something like this is actually in our, the historic election of Barack Obama in 2008, where they had a real fight between who was going to be the nominee, and that's when the superdelegates stepped up and chose Barack Obama over Hillary Clinton. And basically, there could be a similar possibility of having some quote-unquote chaos at this year's RNC, because we obviously have a lot of division of factions and beliefs within the Republican Party right now that are really creating rifts that we haven't seen since like the late 60s, Barry Goldwater, where you have a lot of like strong the conservatives, Tea Party conservatives, moderates, libertarians, and then base party Republicans. So it's kind of an interesting question. Who is the base of the Republican Party right now? Is it the Donald Trumpians? Is it the Ted Cruzians, the Marco Rubios, the Kasichs? What kind of beliefs are running in that blood of that Republican Party? So the delegate issue. So when I was on my group last night, I was asking the question, so are the delegates held to that? Because there was not anything black and white that I was reading that said, yes, whoever wins the most delegate votes wins the nomination. Well, unfortunately, it still isn't really black and white, I guess. However, generally speaking, within the rules that people can find, delegates have pledged their votes in the primary and caucus round. Therefore, during the convention, delegates' votes go to that person for the nomination. So basically, if you said during the primary that you're going to vote for Donald Trump, or you're going to vote for Marco Rubio or Bernie Sanders, you better give your vote to them come time of the national convention. Your vote needs to go there. Super delegates, again, like the 2008 Democratic Party convention, they had way more pull against the other delegates and chose Barack Obama. On the Republican Party, the RNC could propose something called a brokered convention. Here again, so a brokered convention is just part of that rules committee. So they could come early July and say, we're going to do a brokered convention. Because again, they run the show. So they could choose to do that. And a brokered convention is also a little bit different.
Elected, but this is all theory right now, Jim. We have no idea if he's going to. Delegates are no longer tied to what.
Sorry.
If you talk about brokering, what that means is that all of these delegates are no longer tied to what the vote was like in their state. So now they can start wheeling and dealing to say maybe candidate A and candidate B can combine their delegates for one of them, or maybe candidate C and candidate D could do this sort of thing here. No matter how you do it, eventually somebody gets enough people behind them to get over 50%, and as soon as that happens, that becomes the candidate here. It doesn't matter that it was brokered, that's the candidate. So you're right. The Trump contenders out there are worried about this process, saying, what if this is a way of pushing him aside because the establishment doesn't want him? It could happen. Let's look at how it might happen. Let's say that Trump came in and that, in fact, when he arrived, he had more delegates than anybody else. We're not saying this will happen, but if it did happen. And let's say that even though he had more, he did not have enough to win outright. And more importantly, what if party leaders said he is at the ceiling of his support, he cannot get enough to win? Then they could hurry up that process of the dealing and the wheeling backstage and basically make sure that somebody who could be a consensus candidate emerges. In that case, you could have Donald Trump or, frankly, anybody else who came in with the most delegates coming in still being the loser because somebody else was selected. But this is all theory right now, Jim. We have no idea if he's going to be the candidate. We have no idea if any of this is going to happen. We have to see some actual voting before we see if a brokered convention is even possible.
So, brokered convention in a nutshell. Again, I really like these short little videos. I think they're giving us some good clarity on this matter. So they could hold a brokered convention. And again, this is sort of like, I guess, if you want to look at this op-ed down here, again, I have another opinion piece you can feel free to check out as far as looking at, is this a possibility, let's say, if Donald Trump gets the nomination. So the reason why I keep going back to that Donald Trump issue is because he is not part of the establishment, right? He is a self-funded campaigner, and I think that is why some people are drawn to him, as sort of we've kind of talked about back and forth in class. But when it comes to establishment, right, we see Marco Rubio getting all of those key endorsements. Yet Ted Cruz is getting quite a few endorsements as well. So could they, quote unquote, the establishment of the base, whatever the base is now of the Republican Party, could call for the RNC for a brokered convention? Now, the head of the RNC has come out and said that he will not do that because Donald Trump's gone back and forth saying, if I'm running as a Republican, you got to make the promise to keep that for me. But it is possible that they could do this. Again, it's all possibilities and all theoretical. It's not, still pretty close. I mean, Donald Trump only has 79 delegates right now. Unlike, look at the difference between Clinton and Sanders. I mean, right now, there's, to me, Sanders is going to have to work really hard. Even though he's coming out close with percentages because of those superdelegates in the Democratic Party, Hillary Clinton's way ahead of Sanders. Whereas, theoretically, Donald Trump, he still needs a lot more delegates to win the nomination. So it's still up for grabs on the side of the Republican Party, even though I think the media is presenting it like it is not. So our final step, as we know, we have the general election. So after July, we'll know who our 2 candidates are for President of the United States for the general election in November. The Electoral College votes in December, and we know, 99% of the time they go with the state. It's a popular vote, and they have that winner takes all system minus Maine and Nebraska. So I hope this has clarified some things for you. Again, check out these links that I have posted in here. I'm going to post this on the web for you later. And I hope this helped clarify some things. So just go on the thread, comment, and say, hey, this helped. Or if you still have other questions, do some digging yourself too. But ask them my way. I'll see what I can come up with. I just think it's interesting stuff. And I do think it's important to pose that question that was asked in that video. It's this issue of the superdelegates, particularly in the Democratic Party. How is that democratic? Right? So keep thinking about that. Enjoy your rest of your day. We will see you tomorrow.